inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد أشرف الخلق وسيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد سيد الأولين والآخرين اللهم صل وسلم عليه في الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين اللهم آته الوسيلة والفضيلة والدرجة العالية الرفيعة وابعث اللهم المقام المحمود الذي وعدته إنك لا تخلف الميعاد اللهم بارك لنا في جمعنا هذا اللهم اجعل جمعنا هذا جمعا مباركا مرحوما واجعل تفرقنا من بعده تفرقا معصوما ولا تجعل فينا ولا منا ولا معنا شقيا ولا محروما اللهم حبب إلينا الإيمان وزينه في قلوبنا وكره إلينا الكفر والفسوق والعصيان واجعلنا من عبادك الراشدين السعداء الهادين المهديين اللهم اجعلنا من ورثة جناتك جنات النعيم يا أرحم الراحمين والله we call upon you, we pray to you, we beseech you, we ask you by your names and attributes to fill our hearts with your love and the love of your Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the love of our deen and the love of the masjid, the love of the Quran, the love of ibadah and worship. We ask you, Allah, to make that love a means for us being saved on the day of judgment. We ask you, Allah, to make us of those who are guided, those who are steadfast upon the right path. Fill our hearts with your abundant mercy. Fill our homes with your abundant mercy. Oh Allah, we ask you to help us navigate the trials and difficulties of life and to bless us to see truth as truth is and bless us to follow it and to bless us to see falsehood as falsehood is and bless us to avoid it. We ask you to bless our lives and our livelihood and our family and our children and our offspring and all those whom we love for your sake. We ask you to bless our actions and to make the best of our actions the last of our actions and the best of our days the last of our days and the best of all days the day that we meet you and you're pleased with us, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Ameen, ameen. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Amma ba'd, it's a pleasure to be with you guys again. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless these i'tikafs, to bless all of the nights of Ramadan, and to make us of those who are emancipated from hell in this night of Ramadan, if we haven't been already emancipated from hell. We learned from our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that in every night of Ramadan, there are those who are emancipated from hell. So our dua throughout this month is, Oh Allah, emancipate our necks from hell. And what that means to be emancipated from hell is to tread a trajectory in your life that ultimately leads to Jannah, to actually experience true transformation in the blessed month of Ramadan. And ask Allah Azza wa Jal to bless us to experience that. Allahumma ameen. And I'm going to pass it over to Akhi Ibrahim to make some announcements and to start off the program, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Again, it's great to see you all. Just some overall logistics and housekeeping, inshallah. Any side conversations, please have them outside of the main musalla or downstairs. Please keep any kids out of the main musalla unless they're sitting and listening. We have snacks on both sides. And of course, the most important thing, we have the Slido up here. If you're new here, the Slido is a QR code that you can scan. Once you scan it, it'll prompt you to some questions. If you have any questions, you can put them up there anonymously. If you see a question you like, you can upvote it. This isn't Ask Me Anything, but please respect the space. We are in the house of Allah. So please be very respectful in your questions and approach them with humbleness. We're going to try something a little new here. I'm going to try to group these questions based on topic so that we don't jump around and so that we don't dwell on any specific topic too long. So with that said, if you have any questions, you can put the subject line or put the subject, well, this is a marriage question or this is a family question or spiritual question, just to make it easy to sort through them. Until we get through that, inshallah, we have a few questions that came up from before, and I'll start with that. This question revolves around spirituality, so we can start with spirituality. Some people feel that in Ramadan, and I'm getting into it. Do we have anything?
Can I ask something before we get into the questions?
It's an aim.
Okay, alhamdulillah. I'm going to ask the first question.
Go ahead.
All right. Is everyone comfortable with the setup in the masjid, in the musalla? Is everyone comfortable? Would anyone like any adjustments to how everything is? You guys feel like you have enough space? Everything is good? All right. Everything is good? The fan? You guys are hot? You want the fan? Okay, can you please turn on the fans? All right, alhamdulillah. Yeah. You mention it, yeah. Or let Zayd mention it.
I'm not mentioning that. No. Just a piece of advice. Moving forward, when you come to the masjid, it might be a good idea to bring layers with you. So if you're someone who gets colder faster, you can throw something on when we turn on the fans or the AC, so we don't have what we had happen yesterday, where half the crowd was saying they were too hot, half was saying they were too cold. If you're cold, you can always warm yourself up, alhamdulillah, it's a lot easier. Just bring some light jacket or something with you, inshallah.
Can also we get one of the volunteers to check I know the heat was raised a little bit earlier, so that could be contributing to the heat. Can we check the temperature? Maybe you could lower it there. I think the air condition's already on, so hopefully that'll help you. Do we have any other requests? Everyone else is good with everything else? All right, if you want to mention that thing, Ibrahim, you could mention it.
Okay, bismillah. Our marketing team, inshallah, would like to capture images of the crowd. So we asked them to be respectful of the crowd, that they would only take a few short shots from behind. Inshallah, if anyone is uncomfortable with that, when they do so, you can either move yourself out and then come back, inshallah. But we're trying our best to be respectful of the worshippers of Allah who are in the space, while also allowing our team to do their job, inshallah. So if that's something that makes you uncomfortable, do your best to maneuver or to move out until they're done, and then you can come back in, inshallah. And we'll take advice and suggestions and all that after the fact, inshallah. Barakallah fikum.
Barakallah fikum. So the first question is about spirituality. I feel that I've been on autopilot spiritually for a long time, especially when I'm alone. What can I do to break out of this? And other questions come around spiritual numbness, when I do ibadat, or spiritual numbness in Ramadan, or feeling the highs and lows of Iman. So are there any advices around this?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Firstly, I would say, you're saying you're on spiritual autopilot. I hope that means that there are some ibadat that you do very regularly, and you're just not, quote unquote, feeling it. If that's the case, keep doing the ibadat. The worst thing you can do when you are in a rut like that is to be convinced by yourself, by your nafs or the shaitan, that it's not working, it's not important, I'm not feeling it, therefore it doesn't count for me. We don't worship emotions, we don't worship feelings, we don't chase after feelings. We worship Allah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will at times inspire different emotions and different feelings for different reasons inside of us, inshallah. And so the most important thing is that whatever ibadah you're doing, do not stop it. If you're not doing regular ibadat, especially regular nawafil ibadat, then there's your first problem. So if all you do, if you're saying you're on spiritual autopilot, but all you do is the 5 daily prayers, as important as they are, there's a lot that you can do built around those. So you can start doing the sunan before and after. You can start praying salat al-duha. You can start doing the tasabih before and after. And then you can slowly increase it. You can recite the Quran more and so on. But more importantly than anything else, if you really want to break out of a rut of spirituality, it really has to come with a heavy dose of tadabbur and tafakkur. It has to be a heavy dose of you sitting down and reflecting on the Book of Allah, reflecting on the state of your own heart, reflecting on what your challenges are, reflecting on how close you are to Allah, what your character defects are, what sins you committed. If you do that tafakkur and tadabbur, it's typically the best way to break yourself out of that. Sit down with the Book of Allah, read a few ayat, try to understand their meanings, and ask yourself, how do these ayat reflect me? How am I reflected in these ayat? How do I find myself in these ayat? And ask some very critical questions of yourself. And the last thing I'll say, it seems counterintuitive, but really one of the best ways to break out of a spiritual rut is to think about the sins in your life that you have not stopped yet, and do some serious istighfar and tawbah. Just sit down and actually think, sin by sin, and ask Allah to forgive you for that specific sin. Move to the next sin. Ask Allah to forgive you for that specific sin, and reflect on them very seriously. Some of the ulama of the past used to say they would at least once a year, they would sit down and they would try to do an accounting of every sin they've committed since the last time they sat down and did this. And they would just account, I did sin XYZ on this day, Ya Allah forgive me for this sin. And then they would do it one by one by one until they couldn't remember a sin. Not that they got to the end of their sins, but they couldn't remember the specifics of any more of their sins. Then they would do a general istighfar. then they would get up. And they would say, every time we would get up from that qa'dah, from that seating, they would feel a lightness in their heart and in their chest. Alright, so if you're feeling a spiritual rut, and none of the other things I said helped, your increased ibadah didn't help, your tadabbur and tafakkur didn't do it, think deeply about the sins that you're doing and ask Allah for forgiveness, and inshallah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will inspire a new energy in you to worship Him in a new way. Wallahu a'lam.
I would add two things to what Ustaz Zaid just said. One of the things is there's a blessing in the fact that there are different types of acts of worship. Sometimes what you need to do is do one of those acts of worship that easily wakes the soul up. There's certain acts of worship that do that. At the top of this list is visiting the graveyard, visiting the grave, or contemplating death. These types of acts of worship quickly destroy the idol of pleasures in the heart. You'll find that the heart will be so attached to following and pursuing pleasures until it gets exposed to something traumatic, like someone young passing away, and then, sort of, or someone passing away under tragic circumstances, and it just wakes you up. You need to capitalize on those types of moments. So I would say switch gears. If doing salah and siyam or reading Quran isn't doing enough to sort of wake you up, then maybe you need to try something else. About the fikr part of it, this is absolutely something to consider. Did you guys ever wonder what triggers tawbah? What triggers tawbah? What makes, I know that there might be certain things I'm doing that are wrong. How can I find within me the will to actually repent from them? There's actually a science to it. It's not just something that you say with your tongue. And Imam Ibn al-Qayyim, he goes over this in detail in one of his books. He says that the origins of tawbah start from tafakkur, start from reflection. Reflection on what exactly? They say that the ta'ib reflects on al-amr wal-amir. He reflects on the command or what was expected of me and how I've fallen short in that, and the one who commanded me to do it. So when the individual realizes the one who he disobeyed and his attributes and his magnificence, his mercy, his all-knowing nature, Allah saw me when I committed this sin. Allah was with me when I crossed these bounds. People might not know about it, Allah knows about it. When the ta'ib starts realizing that, and realizing how the sin has actually taken a toll on his life, it creates a burning feeling of regret. And that's exactly what tawbah is. So it starts off with tafakkur, reflection, and then it leads to regret. And regret is the doorway to tawbah. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ said, "An-nadamu tawbah." Regret is what tawbah is in essence. But of course it's the doorway to it. Then you need to follow through with certain things after that. So that's just something to build off of what Ustaz Zaid said.
The next question, when cleansing diseases from our hearts, this was a question that also came up last week, but we couldn't get to it. When cleansing diseases from ourselves, how do we ensure we are not projecting or seeing diseases in others that are really in ourselves? So maybe I have a problem with arrogance, and because of that I think it's from someone else, but it's really from me. So I project it onto someone else. And I say, well, that person is really arrogant. So how do I have, I guess, more self-awareness? I think the answer is, I'm not going to answer it.
So I would start, reread the question.
When cleansing diseases from ourselves, how do we ensure we are not projecting, seeing diseases in others that are really in ourselves?
Good question. There's actually one of the Salaf. His name is Abu Sulaiman al-Darani. There was an interesting interaction between him and his student. His student came, this is something about the Salaf. When we're talking about spirituality in our day and age, very often the reality is I have certain perceptions, efforts, personally done, no one else is aware about, and I sort of try to figure things out in like a do-it-yourself method. In the past, our righteous predecessors would actually go to their mentors, their teachers, present their most intimate feelings that are going on inside and ask for advice. That takes a real intimate relationship, a sense of suhbah and companionship that's kind of rare today, to be able to open up with certain things that make you vulnerable. If I'm going to expose my thought process about certain individuals in my life, then I might be exposing a part of me that I know won't really sound good when I put it in words. There's one of the Salaf, he put it in a very nice, interesting way. He said, if our sins had a scent, no one would stand to sit within our vicinity. No one would come near me. If people could smell the sins that I've done, they would not sit near me. Interesting perspective. Anyway, getting back to it, Abu Sulaiman al-Darani was approached by his student. And his student complained to him, I have negative feelings towards fulan. He doesn't mention who it is, a certain person that he regularly interacted with. I have negative feelings and I don't know why. I feel like there is this sense of this barrier between me and this individual. I'm inclined to perceive this person in a negative light. So he said to his student, I feel the same way, but I can't tell. Perhaps this is because of a hardness in my heart that has caused me to incline negatively towards someone who is righteous in themselves. Maybe the problem's me. Maybe I'm the reason why I have a negative perception of this person in my life. This person might actually be good, but the problem is a disease that's clouded my judgment. This is very powerful. If you know who Abu Sulaiman al-Darani is, he's one of the powerhouses of our past when it comes to being a righteous model for others. And he teaches us that the path to spirituality is one that's very introspective. You don't use concepts in spirituality to weaponize against others. Oh, this person's a show-off, mura'i. This person's a person of riya. This person's an arrogant person. This person has envy in their heart. No, you don't do that. When I learn spirituality, it's for me to look introspectively. How does this apply to me? Because all the other things is a distraction. Me discerning whether person X is an arrogant person, a diseased person, a person with ill will in their heart, or whatever it is of no benefit if you look at it critically. What I should really be consumed with is what's going on in my heart. So that's what I would say to that question. Allahu Alam.
Bismillah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I will say this. So everything Sheikh Osama said is obviously a perfect response to the question. You never use the knowledge of what a spiritual disease is to assume a spiritual disease in another person's heart. But I want to, just in case this is the concern that people have, when you are assessing other people, if you have to do that, and you shouldn't have to do that very often, but if you have to assess another person, you assess them based on practical actions they actually took. If you find yourself making leaps in assumptions about why they did something, you need to turn back immediately. So someone does something, so someone leads Salah in the masjid, and they have a very beautiful voice, and your immediate reaction is say, I just think this person's showing off. There's nothing inherent in the action itself to suggest that the person did that. Turn back right away. All right? But you see the person speak ill of someone else. You see the person backbite someone else. Or you see that person lead Salah, and then a month later or something, you see that person drinking alcohol on the street. Right? Now you want to wonder something about the person. I think this person's doing something a little bit shifty. How is he leading Salah one day and then the next day he's drinking? There's a serious problem here. Fair. You can have a serious issue there. You might want to talk to the brother. But to make an assumption about why he led Salah, he was only leading Salah because he was trying to show off, that's something more likely wrong in your heart than in the brother's heart. And it does you no good to assume anything of his heart. When it comes to knowing about spirituality, the only person you can really know is you. That's the only person you can really know. You're not going to ever know anything about anybody else. So if you have to assess about other people, you assess based on actions and based on nothing else. Wallahu ta'ala alam.
Barakallahu feekum. How do you distinguish the fine line between venting or getting pain off of one's chest versus it being labeled as backbiting or being told one is not having sabr? So how do you distinguish the fine line between venting or getting pain off of your chest versus someone saying that's backbiting and, not having sabr?
This is a good question. Very often venting is taken a little too far. And you need to really, really be aware of how much information you're allowing yourself to share with people in your inner circles about someone you're venting about. Because some people, when they vent, they end up talking to like 10, 20, 30 people about what person X did to them. And guess what? The whole community knows that person X did this or said that because this person's vented to half the community, which is a big problem. That's not healthy and that's not proper, right? But venting needs to be within certain bounds. It needs to be done with someone trusted, who can actually assist in giving a mentor, someone who could actually assist in resolving the situation either between the both of you or at least on your end. And it should not extend much beyond that. Our Salaf were very, very careful in the amount of information they would share about others that would, I guess you could say, scar their image. Defamation is something they took very seriously. That's why there's a science called al-jarh wa ta'dil in the science of hadith. One of the disciplines is when you're going to assess the narrators, if you're going to say good things about a narrator, that does not need to be explained. Because the default in believers is that they're good. But when you're going to come to criticize another person, that needs to be taken with a grain of salt. First off, the amount of information you're allowed to share is absolutely limited to what's necessary. You can't go beyond that, right? Like if someone's coming to ask you for advice, should I consider person X for marriage? You can't go and share all of their entire life story in a way that ruins this person's image, especially, it being totally unnecessary. But you can share enough information that would help the person make a guided decision. So when it comes to al-jarh wa ta'dil, the scholars would say if you're going to speak ill of someone, that needs clear precedent and explanation. And I would follow that in that light. Wallahu alam.
The only thing I might add is quite often, if you really, really, really need to vent, like let's just say like I really need to get this off my chest, most of the time you can probably do it without mentioning the person you're venting about, right? So a person did X to me. You can vent to another person without talking about who did it to you, most of the time. And I've gone through this myself, where I've held and I've held and I've held and I've gotten to a loss. I'm not sure what to do anymore. I need to ask for advice. I'll ask for advice from people around me without mentioning the person who's frustrated me so much. And most of the time I'm able to do it without people guessing it either. And so I do think like you do need to be extremely careful about when and how you share, because it is a massive sin. It's not a small sin. It is a very big sin to spread negative ideas or negative rumors about a person, even if you feel very strongly in your heart, this person's a bad person, they wronged me. There's still a strong possibility that you're just misreading the situation because you're biased and you're emotional. And so to protect yourself in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you want to protect your brother. Right? If you protect the wrongdoings of your brother, Allah will protect you on the Day of Judgment. He'll protect your image as much as you protect other people's images. So even if you feel like I really need to get this off my chest because it's just eating away at me or I need some advice, most of the time I've found in my life I'm able to do that without actually mentioning the person that I'm talking about. And I do my best to cover my tracks so people can't easily guess who it is that I'm referring to. Wallahu a'lam.
Barakallahu feekum. there's a question about anger and irritability. How can you deal with anger and irritability in a day-to-day life if you are very easily overstimulated?
Why are you overstimulated? What are you doing?
Bismillah. So this is actually this question actually hits home. Growing up, I was a very quick to anger type kid. Nobody here is old enough to have played with me in like different sports leagues and stuff like that. But I used to use my temper a lot, quite a bit actually.
I cannot imagine that.
And even to this day, like when I'm dealing with my kids or with clients at work, I can get triggered very quickly at times. And I can go from 0 to 100 and then back down to 0 very quickly, right? So it hits close to home. I'll say a few things. When I was younger, one thing I learned about myself was that my anger came out way more often when I was in a state of like competition. When I cared about something really deeply, my anger would come out, right? Because I'd get frustrated that I lost, or I didn't play as well, or I didn't do as well on a test as I wanted to do, or something like that. So I began to actually remove any of those things that weren't necessary. I just removed them from my life, right? And so that, yes, I actually stopped playing sports for a period of time. I wouldn't play basketball with friends. I wouldn't play football with friends because I'd get too angry. I'd get too frustrated, and I just didn't want that to be me. Right now, I don't know that you have to do that. I would suggest that you do if you have the same problem I do, because in the long term, like in the long arc of your life, unless you're a real athlete, sports are not going to be as important. You playing sports are not going to be as important, competitive sports. And so if that's really what's triggering you, for example, take it out. Right? When you may have a bunch of other things beyond, I'm just giving you a personal example. There may be other things in your life that get you triggered that are not important to your life. If you're really trying to manage your anger, get rid of those things. All right, and then beyond that, a lot of it just has to come down to a lot of spiritual practices. So you do have to, we repeat the same advices over and over, but you do have to do a lot of adhkar, have a wird of Quran, have a wird of dhikr, do a lot of istighfar, a lot of salawat upon the Prophet ﷺ, because those things do have a calming effect, especially over a long period of time. But then the other thing is, we spoke about this at length last Friday. You do have to, like, it's good that you're asking this question, you're aware of this problem, but you do have to look inside you and ask yourself why you're so quick to get triggered. Right? So why am I getting frustrated so often? And you have to start, like, we didn't get this far into it last week, but our ulama in the sciences of tasawwuf and tazkiyatun nafs have done a lot of work on mapping out what happens in the heart of a person. So how do you get from a feeling to a thought, to an idea, to an intention, and then to an action? They actually have mapped out this process. And what happens is, what the expectation is, as you get stronger and stronger and stronger in controlling your nafs, you'll be able to stop things way before they become actions. So you can notice in yourself, there's an idea growing in my heart that I need to throw out right now. Right? And so I'll give you an example. When I keep bringing my daughter up in these sessions, right? Hopefully she doesn't watch these one day, right? But there are times, for example, right, where, especially putting my daughter to sleep at night, she can be very frustrating to deal with. She never wants to sleep. I brought this example up last week as well. She never wants to sleep, ever. Doesn't matter if she's about to knock out and fall flat on her face. If you ask her to sleep, she's not going to sleep. And so she can be really, really frustrating. And my irritability can come out a lot at that time. Late at night, trying to put her to sleep, she won't go to sleep. I might scream, I might yell. Almost never works. She never reacts to that. What I've had to start to do, right, is I've had to start to tell myself, all right, before I go into the room, I'm going to do some salawat. I'm going to get myself ready. I make a dua to Allah. Ya Allah, beautify my character with my daughter. This is ibadah. She's learning from me. If I want her to have good character, I have to model it. But then beyond that, I prep myself to be aware of that anger as it's coming up. So when I start to feel it come up, I actually stop and close my eyes. And I'll ask Allah, Ya Allah, I just don't, not not verbally, in my heart, Ya Allah, I don't want this to happen. Please keep me calm. And not all the time, maybe 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10, I'm able to stop it, right? So it's a process of learning about yourself and starting to actually understand those conversations you're having internally. When you're able to do that little by little, more and more, you'll be able to stop yourself much earlier. But you do have to reflect on why it's happening. My frustration with my daughter, for example, I recognize comes from the fact that I can't actually control her. As much as I want to, I can't control her. She's another human being. She has her own will and desires, just like every other human being on earth. Because she's so young, I have this sense in my head that she should just listen to everything I say right away. But she's another human being just like everybody else. I have to be as patient with her as I am with Ibrahim when he frustrates me. Right? He doesn't listen to me. I'm not going to scream and shout at him. I'm going to be calm. Likewise, I don't want to do that to anybody else. But I had to spend time reflecting on this. Why do I get so irritable with her when I'm not? Like Sheikh Osama was saying, I can't imagine you getting mad. I would never scream at Sheikh Osama. Why would I not scream at him, but I would scream at her? Right? I mean, besides the fact that he's my sheikh, right? There is the fact that there is an expectation. She's my daughter, she should just listen. And that's not true, it's not right, right? She's entrusted to me by Allah. I have to show her just as much love and respect as I would to anybody else. And then you can try to stop yourself earlier. Wallahu a'lam.
Jazakallah khair. Allah barik feek, Sidi. I'll just say something quick, just so we get through more questions. The Prophet ﷺ really makes it clear for us about certain things or certain characteristics that we hope to gain in our lives. Prophet ﷺ said in hadith, إِنَّمَا الْعِلْمُ بِالتَّعَلُّمِ وَالْحِلْمُ بِالتَّحَلُّمِ. In a very brief statement, the Prophet ﷺ tells us about knowledge. Knowledge is about exerting yourself to gain it. And patience is about exerting yourself to become someone who's halim, someone who has forbearance and patience. Meaning that to become a patient person, you need to push through certain feelings and emotions. You need to work through them. To become a patient person, you're going to lose your patience 1,000 times until you ultimately get there, if that's what you're aiming for. But again, it's a lifestyle. If everything in your life is, amping you up, then obviously at certain critical points, the first thing that's going to come out of your mouth is something that is full of rage and anger. Meaning that, even in the, whether it's the manner you drive or the manner you carry yourself in your home, even the thing like with sports, like Ustaz Zaid mentioned, certain things, there's a lot of wisdom in the Prophet ﷺ's guidance on diffusing anger. In order for me to diffuse anger, maybe I need to train myself not to respond immediately to things as soon as they happen. I need to program myself in a way that, I'm just not going to respond right now. Whether I can or can't, it's going to become a mode of living. Same thing with everything else. If I get myself used to this, then maybe perhaps the first thing that comes out of my mouth will be something sensible, and as opposed to be something emotionally charged. It's not easy to develop this type of characteristic, but again, spirituality is a lifestyle you embrace. If it becomes a part of my being to focus inwardly, even people now, non-Muslims in our society, they realize this. The way we work, the office, the workspace, causes a lot of stress and anxiety, and guess what? A lot of people end up letting that loose when they go home. Just even the manner of work, fast-paced, high expectations, and all of that creates a whole lot of negative energy inside. Where's it going to go? It's either going to go out in prayers, worship, sujood, dhikr, or it's going to go out on those closest to me once I get home. So I need to be very mindful of this, and Allah Alam, I think that's grained wisdom from the Prophet ﷺ.
Barakallah feek, Shaykhna. Now moving on to family and non-marriage relationships. The first question here is, what's a way to fix a bad relationship with a parent?
What's a way to fix a bad relationship with a parent? This is a pretty general question, man.
We'll start it with this bigger one, and then we'll have shorter questions.
All right. It depends on what's causing the bad relationship with the parent. Is it the way you speak, or the way you act, or the way you function, or is it just because they're abusive? What's the trigger? What's the problem? How does it happen? These types of things need to be I guess you could say, fleshed out. Why is my relationship with my mother or father the way it is? Now, usually, you'll find multiple factors contributing to it. On their side, perhaps, and on my side as well. And, if I'm honest with myself, I may be able to identify certain things that I could do a little bit better on. Oftentimes when this question is presented, the response in many people's mind, well, the reason why there's so many problems between me and my parents is because my parents are unreasonable. They're just so unfair. They're always on my case. They hardly have any mercy with me. They always set high expectations. They micromanage me. They. But the problem with this manner of thinking is we're not going to change our parents. We can't control other people's behaviors, but maybe perhaps if I reorient myself to start looking inwardly, I'll actually find practical solutions. Now, I just warn of one thing. Sometimes when people go through tough situations, they find themselves in this loop where they'll vent endlessly. My life, my family, because of this and because of this person, and that person does this person doesn't do that, so on and so forth. And this will never lead to a solution. Straight up, it won't lead to a solution. I would rather ask the question in this way. What are the things that I could possibly do that'll minimize the toxicity between me and my parents? Is there anything I could possibly do? Maybe I trigger them with certain responses I have. Maybe I trigger them because I act unreasonably sometimes. Maybe, if I learn to speak a little bit more sweetly, I'd be able to capture the heart of my mother or my father. There's a big fix for a lot of problems. The Prophet ﷺ says it, وَالْكَلِمَةُ الطَّيِّبَةُ صَدَقَةٌ. The pleasant word is a form of charity. Why? Because just saying something sweet could diffuse an entire problem. And sometimes it is the most elusive thing for some people to do. Just say a sweet word. Maybe the trigger for my mother or father is as soon as they say something, I roll the eye, my eye is halfway around the world. Or I just turn my face in disgust or in annoyance and frustration. Maybe if I reacted a little bit differently, more lovingly, well, they don't deserve it. Well, who cares? They're your parents. Do it anyway. Maybe that'll help solve your problems. Wallahu a'lam. That's what I would say about that. And that's just a proactive solution. I'm not saying this for parents who are like over the top abusive. Maybe there's other fixes for those types of situations. But this is about the standard. Wallahu a'lam.
Barakallah feek. We'll do one more family one and then we'll go into a rapid fire halal haram fiqh questions. I believe someone I'm close friends with gives me hasad and doesn't want me to succeed or is jealous of me. How can I still be their friend and protect myself? You want to start?
There's so much to ask there. I don't like. That's such a huge assumption. It's such a big assumption, but let's just assume your assumption is correct. Try your best not to show off. Try your best to keep good things that happen to you or that you have as hidden as possible, and read the mu'awwadat as often as you possibly can. Surah Al-Ikhlas, Surah Al-Falaq and Surah Al-Nas, read them every morning and every evening, and make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects you from hasad. This is a very common dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught us to do. There's no great secret beyond that. I certainly don't think, unless you have like some very strong evidence that the person did something to you, I don't think you should burn bridges over that sense. In fact, I'm not trying to say anything about you if you're the questioner, but if someone was to come to me and ask me that question, my first reaction would be in my head, I need to find out how full of themselves this person is. All right, because only a person, I shouldn't say only, really, unless there's real evidence, like the person, like you heard them and they didn't know that you can hear them, only a person who thinks so much of themselves would think that other people worry about them so much that they're going to do hasad to them. Wallahu a'lam.
One quick thing I would just add to it. Look, if you feel, look, hasad, just to restate this, I think we mentioned it in one of our talks recently, hasad's not always maliciously done. Like, sometimes it's done unknowingly or unwillingly, because a person might be going through a lot of problems in their personal life and someone near to them might be very successful. And it just triggers certain feelings inside. And they might not even be realizing what they're doing. So regardless of what that is, if you feel like someone's going through tough times in their life, or you feel like they may have certain feelings in their heart, then the best thing you could possibly do is be supportive, make dua for them. Maybe perhaps uplift them. Maybe perhaps, be their source of inspiration for them in their life, and maybe that'll minimize any ill feelings they might develop in their heart towards you. That's one of the cures for hasad. If you feel like someone has hasad towards you, then instead of allowing that feeling to harbor, just be positive, be good towards others, uplift them, encourage them and inspire them, embrace them. Don't turn your back on people because of assumptions that you might have in your heart, like Ustad Zaid was saying. That's what I would say. Wallahu alam.
Barakallahu feekum. The next question, slightly family, slightly fiqh. Let me just pull it up. What is the ruling on having children? Is it something that's required once you're married?
What's the ruling on having children? Is it required once you're married? First off, all right, so this question needs to be asked in a different way if you're asking for a fiqh ruling. So, is it required to have children? Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who creates in the wombs what He wills. I don't have children by my own doing. Now, is it required to try to have children? The answer to this is of course not. However, there's something to keep in mind here. If we're going to be speaking about contraceptives and avoiding having children, that's something that needs to be mutually agreed upon between the spouses. They actually mention this in the books of fiqh. So using a contraceptive to avoid pregnancy is something that's allowable but makruh. It's offensive. The Prophet ﷺ, that's a default ruling. Now, of course, if there's an extremely legitimate, unique circumstance that would absolutely warrant it, perhaps it could be considered. But the default ruling is that it's makruh to use such contraceptives because it lacks some element of tawakkul. Now, if I'm going to use them, though, it needs to be by mutual agreement. It can't be that the husband is just going to make this decision unilaterally and impose it on his wife because she has a right to a child. And vice versa is also applicable. It can't be that the wife just unilaterally imposes this, that I'm not going to have a child, whether you like it or not, because that would be a form of oppression on his part or her part, because the other side, going into marriage, has a right to a child if they want. Now, having a child is a blessing, and wanting a child is a right for both the husband and wife. And avoiding having a child is something allowable if it is mutually agreed upon. Wallahu a'lam, that's what I'd say about that.
Barakallahu feek. Just pulling it up. What is the ruling for touching the Quran during your menstrual cycle?
The ruling, okay, so what do you mean by Quran? Do you mean your Quran app that's on your phone? No one would say touching your Quran or touching your phone under any circumstance is somehow not allowable. It's always allowable to touch your phone and even open the Quran app, even if you're in a major state of impurity, in your monthly cycle or whatever it is. You could touch your Quran app, you could turn the pages, because again, this is a projection of an image. That's what it is. There's no disagreement, or I should say, there's hardly a disagreement about that. Now, about reciting Quran in the monthly cycle, if you're asking about the traditional opinion, meaning the opinion held, or the opinions held by the scholars of the past, then the majority of scholars state that is not allowable during the monthly cycle because of certain hadith that they reference about the issue. So that's the opinion held by the majority. There is an opinion in the Maliki school that allows a woman to recite Quran during her monthly cycle if she's a Quran teacher or if she's studying Quran for the purpose of studying or teaching. And this is an opinion that's allowed to follow, and it's completely fine, no problem with it at all. There are other modern opinions that drift away from this standard. They're held by minorities, you could say, minorities among the scholars, that drifts away from the idea of prohibiting recitation or holding of the Quran during the monthly cycle. Wallahu alam. Now someone might have questions in their mind. Why is this the case? Is this only for women? Actually, this is not about a man-woman thing, by the way. It's about purity versus impurity. Even for men, in the minor state of impurity, like say if you didn't have wudu, can I touch the Quran? Can I touch the mushaf, the normal mushaf? Can I touch it? According to the vast majorities of the scholars of the past, if I'm going to touch the actual mushaf, I need to have wudu. This is the standard opinion. Now, is there a minority that says otherwise, that you don't need to have wudu? Yes, there is another opinion. It's a minority. So you see, it's actually applicable across the board. And I hope that helps us avoid the issues that might arise in the mind of it being something that's sexist against women or something like that. No, not at all. It's something about purity and impurity. And the same opinion in the Maliki school applies for that issue, by the way, as well. If a man is in a minor state of impurity, can he hold and recite the Quran? The Maliki school says the same for this issue. If the person is a Quran teacher or a student, then they could, because imagine if you're in a school learning Quran for hours on end, and you're someone who frequently loses their wudu, you're going to have to make wudu tons of times throughout your day while you're studying the Quran. So that's why they have this exception. So I hope that clarifies it. Allah alam. There's someone with their hand up. I don't know if you want to. Over there. Who are you talking about? So, for men and women, if you're in a major state of impurity, you should not recite the Quran aloud or hold the mushaf, right? For men and women, if you're in a minor state of impurity, according to most scholars, you should not touch the mushaf, but you could recite it out loud. So that's the breakdown of it. And again, are there other opinions that state otherwise? Yeah, there are. And that's one of the beautiful things about fiqh. What I said just gives you a barometer. How precautious do I want to be? Do I want to follow a minority opinion? If the answer is yes, fine. Go ahead. That's fine. There is some flexibility in this. If I want to be more precautious and avoid gray areas, then that's great too. That's great. That's why this difference of opinion is very useful for us. Wallahu a'lam.
Barakallahu feek. Is wearing musk haram for women?
Is wearing musk haram for women? Well, you got to tell me the circumstance. If it's at home or in the presence of other women, then absolutely not. If it's outside in the public, then there's a hadith that say that's very problematic. Yeah.
For sisters who broke fast for legitimate excuse but couldn't make up before the next Ramadan, should they make up the fasting and still give money, or both?
So if you have days due, and this doesn't just apply to sisters, by the way. Say if you had to break your fast for whatever reason, and you're excused with that. And then, when we talk about the months after Ramadan, we're going to ask a question. Is your excuse ongoing or has it ended? If your excuse is ongoing from Ramadan to Ramadan, and you didn't get an opportunity to make it up, then of course all you have to do is make it up when you can. You're not going to have to do anything more than that. However, if your excuse has ended, and then you just end up not making up the days before next Ramadan, then we have a problem. This is sinful on one end, and on the other end, you're still going to have to make up the day, and on top of that, you're going to have to give fidya. Fidya is a monetary amount, approximately between $10 and $15 for each day that you need to make up. Now, of course, understanding like this is critical because so this applies to men and women again, but this is especially critical for sisters because sisters who are in the process of pregnancies and then breastfeeding after that might go years on end without fasting or without having the opportunity to fast. And when it comes for them to make up those days, all they have to do is make up the days. we're talking about situations where there's negligence, meaning the person had a chance to make up, but decided just not to, just decided not to. You get it? So, Allah Alam, that's the situation.
All right. Barakallah feek. Is zakat done on net income or money accumulated and retained over a year?
Is zakat done? So basically when you come to give zakat, now the subject of zakat is a vast subject. But here are a few terms that you need to know about zakat. There's something called nisab. What is nisab? Nisab is a minimum threshold. What is this minimum threshold? 85 grams of gold. How much is that? It's going to fluctuate based on the market. I think last time I checked, within the recent months, it was like $5,300 or something like that. That's the minimum threshold. If I have that amount, that's what we call nisab. That means in terms of fiqh, I am considered well off. If I have $5,300 in my bank account, I'm going to ask the question, has there been a hawl? What is hawl? The passing of an entire year with me maintaining nisab. If the answer is yes, then I'm going to have to pay zakah. Zakah on what? Do I need to have the money in my possession for an entire year for me to have to pay zakah on it? The answer? Yes or no? If you say yes, raise your hand. If you say no, raise your hand. If you don't know, raise your hand. Okay. At least people are awake, alhamdulillah. The answer to this question is no. You don't need to have the money in your possession for an entire year for you to have to pay zakah on it. You need to have the minimum threshold for a year for you to be considered well off, hence you owe zakah. So say if my zakah year starts in January and I have $10,000 and I maintain these $10,000 all the way till December. December comes, somehow I win big and I get $50,000. What am I going to pay zakah on? The total 60 or the 10? I'm going to pay zakah on the 60 because me adding that 50 to it doesn't matter. The minimum threshold is what matters. Because if I don't think of it like this, it would just, it'd be insane to try to calculate zakah otherwise. Because you're always spending money, getting money. If I'm going to start having to think of every dollar and when it's come in my possession and if a full year passed on it, you can't even begin to calculate in that way. Wallahu alam.
One last quick question, then we'll jump in. Is wudu over makeup acceptable?
Is wudu over makeup acceptable? How's it going to look after you put the water on it, man?
There's waterproof stuff, I think.
All right. Anything, look, pay attention to this. Anything that blocks the water from reaching to where it needs to go is going to make the wudu null and void. What would this apply to? Say if you were to put some petroleum jelly on your skin, right? It's pretty thick stuff. Pretty thick stuff. What happens when you put the water on your skin after it has petroleum jelly on it? It's going to slide off. It's not really going to penetrate past that layer of the jelly that's there, even if you rub it on your skin, right? So that is something that would block the water. So they would say you would need to rub that off before you can actually properly do wudu on it. Same thing would apply to makeup. And same thing would apply to what they call halal nail polish. Have you guys heard of halal nail polish? The breathable stuff? That actually, even if it's marketed as halal, it doesn't actually suffice in what needs to be done for your wudu to be proper. Why? Because even if it's breathable and the moisture can sort of get under, what you need to actually have happen is the water flow on your nails and not just allow moisture to reach there. And that's not going to happen with that nail polish on your, and even the moisture reaching underneath it. I know some shuyukh, subhanAllah, fiqh is truly a science. Some shuyukh actually tested it. It needs to be kept in water for an extended period, I forgot how many seconds, for it to actually begin to penetrate underneath that layer. So it's never going to suffice. You can't make wudu on top of makeup.
Don't take your fiqh from companies.
Don't take your fiqh from companies, as Ustad Zaid said.
Barakallahu feekum. Must you follow one of the four madhhab, or is it okay to mix and match and take a general
All
consensus?
right, I want to take a break. Ask a question to Ustad Zaidi Ahmed Sheikh.
All right. What's your opinion on cats?
So just to give some shabab stopped me yesterday to ask this question. I told them bring it up.
All right, fine. Say it again. What is it?
I actually told him to wait for Sheikh Yasser.
Yeah, he has a good answer. Must you follow one of the four madhhab, or is it okay to mix and match a general consensus?
All right. Must you follow the four madhahib or can you mix and match? You know, this is like such a packed question. And I wish that someone who's asking this type of question would actually invest some time in like studying fiqh, attending a course. Because these are the types of things, you know, it's really important for me to actually begin to have a meaningful connection with the deen. You know, that's actually one of the things that builds iman in the heart. When it's not just about ritual worship, it's actually me being invested in learning about Allah, learning about the Prophet, learning about the prophetic tradition, learning about the scholarly legacy. All of these things build iman in the heart. It's a really critical part to it. And this question, if I may say, needs me to unpack a few different things. What are madhahib? Why do they exist? Why do scholars differ? These are big questions to answer. And then, what's the problem with mixing and matching? This is perhaps the lowest hanging fruit among these. What's the problem with mixing and matching? If I'm going to follow what we call a madhhab, do I need to follow it through and through? Or is there some flexibility in certain arenas, in certain regards? If so, what are they? You know, when can I follow some flexible approaches to address real difficult circumstances in my life? This is another thing. See, this is a lecture series in itself, right? There is a low-hanging fruit in this, and there's something. I cannot be whimsical when I approach religion. I cannot be whimsical when I approach religion. What does that mean? I cannot try to do what we call fatwa shopping. The scholars call it something else. We have fatwa shopping, right? And then the scholars call it talfiq. What is talfiq? Talfiq is when I match opinions in a manner that no scholar at all says, because it's convenient, right? I'm just going to follow the best of what everyone has. So, for example, the Hanafi school allows me to shorten prayers for 15 days. Great. I'm going to follow that because the Shafi'i school only does it for 6. All right? Now, I know there's like probably a ton of questions going on in your mind. What is Shafi'i? What is Hanafi? Who gave them the authority to say 6 and who gave them the authority to say 15? Please take a course. Please, this needs a lot of explanation. But anyway, there's one opinion that says, while traveling, if you're traveling for 2 weeks, 15 days, you can shorten your prayers. But guess what? You can't combine them. Only shorten them. Then when you go to the Shafi'i school, they're going to tell you, you can combine your prayers and shorten them during your travel. But you can only do it for 6 days. So we're going to take the best of both. And I say, you know what? I'm going to make my own madhhab. I'm going to shorten prayers and combine them for 15 days. And I'm going to come up with my own opinion. Smart guy, right? You can't do that. You can't be whimsical when in your approach towards fiqh. And again, I didn't really do that justice because it needs like an hour by itself. So we'll have a lecture on it one day by itself. Wallahu alam.
Moving on to marriage questions. I'm sure you guys are now listening. How should a woman go about marriage if they do not have a mahram, no father, no male siblings, or Muslim male family? Zaid, would you like to start? You haven't spoken.
All right, say it again.
How should a woman go about marriage if they do not have a mahram?
All right, how should a woman go about marriage if she doesn't have a mahram? Look, when it comes to, finding if we could all please just stay on one conversation. Sisters in the back, if you could just, Jazakumullah khair. When it comes to finding a suitor, or basically someone that you think you're compatible with, that you want to pursue marriage with, that process, I think, today has largely left the scope of, all right, I'm going to wait for my father to find me somebody, or my mother, or something like that. People are usually looking on their own. But when it comes to actually doing the marriage contract, if there is no mahram, well, the question is, what is a mahram? Who fulfills the role of representing a woman in marriage? Why does the woman need someone to represent her in marriage? Again, big question. But who fulfills that role? The father, the grandfather, the uncles, all right? If not the brothers, these are individuals who would be fitting to represent. None of them are Muslim or none of them are present. In this case, the woman would give power of attorney, wakala, tawkil, to someone to represent her, whether it's the imam or someone else, to do the marriage. That's how it would be answered through the lens of fiqh. But again, there's other discussions that are not really fiqh based. Why do we have this concept to begin with? What's its purpose? What's its role? What happens if your father is not a good person? Can they be a mahram? Is the father always someone relied upon to represent the girl in marriage? Again, so much to say about that, but that's what I would say. Wallahu alam. There's someone with their hand up here. Yeah. If the father is not a Muslim, they would not be the wali. The wali meaning the representative. Why? Because Sharia would not allow such a person to take charge of this type of matter without verifying that they would have her best interest at heart. And they might not. Now what I do sometimes, if her father is present and comes to the marriage, I may have them sign as an honorary guest just to make them feel part of the process. But technically speaking, that's the reason. We would say the same thing if the father's Muslim, but there is a known enmity between him and his daughter, or he's not someone who's really religious at heart. Sharia would not allow this girl to be left to be oppressed by a father who's not just and fair, and who would deny her from good marriage opportunities in these types of situations. Wallahu alam.
Before we go on, there are some, I can't tell if it's young brothers or youngsters. There's someone outside in the parking lot making a whole lot of noise. If someone can go out and just ask them to either lower their voices or come inside. It's 1:30 a.m. and we have neighbors. The masjid needs to be respectful of its neighbors. So if someone can go take care of that outside, be loving and respectful, but tell them Zayd is asking them to either keep it down or come inside, inshallah. Jazakallah khair.
Also, I'll make an announcement about the questions. Please keep them respectful. They will be getting deleted.
I want to see what these disrespectful questions are.
Everyone just went out to slide over.
That's fine. I'm going to get upvoted now. I lost the other question. So what is the proper way to get to know someone? Let me pull up the exact question. What is the proper way to get to know a potential spouse? How do you decide whether or not they are the right person for you?
Finally got a break.
Alhamdulillah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Bismillah. I think firstly, I would advise on both sides, both genders, don't invest a lot of time in getting to know someone without speaking to your parents first, or at least early in the process. For those of you who are younger, first, right? If you're a little older and you've been a little bit more seasoned by life, I can understand that maybe you're going to start off a little bit first, just to see if there's some initial compatibility, and then I would still suggest you let your parents in on the conversation very, very early. If you're younger, if you say this is your first marriage and you're less than 25 years old, don't begin the process without speaking to your parents first. One of the most common and frustrating questions I get, especially when I visit MSAs, is I've gotten to know brother X, I've gotten to know sister Y, we're in love, we're soulmates, we're the only ones for each other, but her parents or his parents are not willing to accept the other person. right? Just don't put yourself in that situation. Don't get to know the other person seriously, and don't invest the time or the energy until you've actually had a conversation with your parents first that you want to do this. All right? And I would say both parents, personally. If it was me, and when it was me, both parents had to be in on it. I wasn't going to speak to someone, even if my parents were on board, if her parents weren't already on board. There was no reason to do it. There was no wisdom in doing that. Once you're past that, there is a process of discovery that you have to go through. I would suggest again, before you begin to invest in getting to know someone else, invest some time in getting to know yourself first. And I don't mean this in some like new age, go find yourself by backpacking across Europe and, do some like eat, pray, love stuff, right? That's not what I'm talking about, right? Some of the guys in this masjid a few years ago asked me to start a halaqah with them. And when I asked them, what do you want the halaqah for? They said, we want to get married and we just want to just help us get married, right? Once we get married, we don't need the halaqah anymore. Alhamdulillah. And the whole halaqah, we stopped at a certain point, but the entirety of the halaqah, the bulk of the halaqah was just me asking them questions about themselves and asking them to answer questions about themselves. Because 9 times out of 10, when I've dealt with young men who are trying to get married, they have no idea what they're about. They have no idea what they want out of life. They have no idea what they want out of a spouse. They have no real idea how they envision their life being in 10 years or 15 years. Now, of course, everything is up to the qadr of Allah, right? But like we said yesterday, you do your best. You think through things, right? So you have to know what actually matters to me. What is it that I'm looking for? 8 years from now when I'm married, and if I want kids, I have 2 kids. What do I want my life to look like on a random Tuesday in the middle of some month in May or something like that? Right? How do you want your life to actually look? What are your goals in life? What are you trying to pursue? What are you hoping you're going to achieve before you're on your deathbed? Those are really important questions for you to know, because they'll then dictate the type of person you're going to look for. If you don't know what you're looking for, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen, especially from the guy's side. You're going to meet a young woman. She's going to be pretty. She's going to have all the look of a modest person. She's going to give you some right answers, and you're going to say after 1 or 2 meetings, great, I'm ready to go. All right? For the sister, it might take a little bit longer, and that's typically the case, by the way. After 1 or 2 sittings, most guys, they know they're ready to go. After maybe 7 or 8, that's when the sister's ready to go. All right? But if you don't know what you actually want, you're not really going to have a good answer. It's just going to be, she has the look that I think I'm going for. Right? Even if it's not about she's pretty, she has the religious look, right? She wears the hijab, she dresses in a certain way. That's not the totality of what you're looking for in a person. Right? So know what it is you want out of life, so you know what you're actually asking the other person. Then, when it comes to discovering the other person, there are a series of real conversations you guys can have. That's a much longer conversation about what type of questions you should be asking, what type of conversations you should be doing. And the process is a mix of forced awkwardness and organic comfort. You're going to have to force some weird questions. That's not natural to a normal conversation. That's okay. This isn't meant to be a normal conversation. But you also do want to create some organic experiences where you're getting to see the person as they really are. You want to see the person with their family. You might want to see them with their friends. Right? So you get a sense a little bit more about who these type of people are. That's a much, much longer conversation. I do know that the masjid's planning to do a marriage workshop here, inshallah. Inshallah, we will be partnering with the Family and Youth Institute. The Family and Youth Institute has done a ton of work already for you. So if you go to thefyi.org or you just Google fyr.org marriage toolkit, you will find hundreds of questions along with a whole process laid out for you. How do I get to know a person? Once you're ready to actually do that discovery, they do have a whole process. They have a whole bunch of questions you can follow. And hopefully in that workshop, we can go into a little bit more detail. Want to say something, Sheikh? Or are you too tired out?
Ya Rab, Bismillah. Yeah, the only thing I'd add to what Ustad Zaid said, look, I know this is really hard to swallow and digest, and I know that for many people, they just can't come to terms with thinking like this about marriage. What Ustad Zaid said is really, really critical. I'm telling you guys, brothers and sisters, don't allow the conversations leading up to a marriage proposal to be very drawn out and extended. Too many people get emotionally invested way too soon. And I'm telling you, it causes all kinds of problems, even if it ends up actually materializing into a process. Sometimes it doesn't materialize into a process at all. They've been talking for like 6 months, and they're both emotionally invested, and they both walk away extremely hurt because it didn't work out, right? You shouldn't put yourself in those types of situations. What if it does end up working out? I'll tell you this, I can't tell you over the years how many people have come to me. Their core problem is they're still engaged. They don't even have ketbik tab yet. They're talking every day, twice a day. They're living as though they're married, and they're just like at each other's throats fighting. Why? Because they have way too much interaction with each other than is healthy at their stage in their relationship. And what does that exactly mean, brothers and sisters? You know, there are stages in developing your relationship with someone who's actually going to be your husband and wife. There's this engagement stage, and then there is a ketbik tab stage where there's a marriage contract. It's as though you're married. You're married technically, Islamically, but you're not actually married, meaning you're not experiencing marriage life. And when these processes or these steps get drawn out too much, it ends up leaving way too much room for fudul, unnecessary thing. You know, Imam Ghazali, when he lists out the flaws in speech, he lists out over 20 flaws in speech. Flaws meaning spiritual flaws. One of these is laghu. Laghu is unnecessary. You know, one of the forms of bliss in Jannah is there's no laghu in it. What does laghu mean? Something that is absolutely of no benefit. You know how many good marriage situations have failed because of laghu, unnecessary things, just making unnecessary comments, unnecessary reactions, overreactions. Oh man, it's like the story of countless engagements that have failed. And please take these words to heart, brothers and sisters. I know that you'd love to talk with someone who you're infatuated with day and night because it's exciting, it's enticing, but it's really unhealthy most of the time. Let things simmer and play out in a healthy way. I'm sorry, I wanted to make that quick, but it ended up being a little long. So,
What information can be kept from a potential spouse prior and then even after marriage? How can one respond if a potential spouse pries for more information?
The easier question is what can. What can be kept? Yes. I mean, that question is like so, it's so big. What can't be kept, definitely, are things that are going to impact that person's life and choice, right? So what I mean by that, for example, is if you have a serious health defect that's going to impact how they experience life, at a certain point in the marriage, like get to know you process, that has to become clear, right? Or for example, if you know that you're going to have some responsibility, like, hey, one of my parents is really sick, I'm going to have them live with me, or I'm going to have to live with them for an extended period of time, and whoever I marry is going to have to be willing to take that on with me or not. All of that is, those type of things that are going to really impact the person's life cannot be kept. I wonder, I think maybe what this questioner is asking is like, do I have to share all of my previous sins? No, you don't have to share all of your previous sins with everyone that you speak to for marriage. Whether or not some sins have to be shared, I'll actually leave to Sheikh Osama. Again, I'm not sure what's going on outside, but someone's making a whole lot of noise. Maybe it is the wind, but I hope so. I'll leave it to Sheikh Osama about which sins cannot be kept. Actually, I'll just leave it there then. I can't remember what I was going to say. So tafadhal.
Jazakallah khair. Look, this is a very, very tough question to deal with, especially if you have a sketchy past, where you've done things that you regret, you're a changed person, but you don't want to necessarily expose yourself to every person who comes and asks for you, or every person you're considering for marriage. So how do you deal with it? let me ask you guys that question. You guys, like, say if someone, like, committed kaba'ir, major sins. Let me see what you guys think. If someone committed a major sin, say if they had an illicit relationship with somebody, and now they've done tawbah, it's something in their past, it's not really affecting their life currently. Should you share that type of thing with someone you're considering for marriage? If you say yes, raise your hand. If you say no, raise your hand. All right. If you said yes, is anyone here who raised their hand and said yes willing to share your logic? I know you only got 200 people in the room, so you're willing to share your logic? If they ask you, what are you going to lie to them? You're going to tell them, right? That's your logic? All right, now here's a question for you. Say if you've done this, now, who knows how many times you're going to have to try until you find somebody who's going to actually be able to swallow this and move on? Maybe 20? What's going to happen after you have to deal with this so many times? Half the community is going to know, hey, this person did this sin, by the way. What did I just do? If someone commits zina, fornication, can they share this information with people? Can they disclose it? Look, they have this, they say this in the books of fiqh directly. It is haram for someone to disgrace themselves with exposing themselves to having committed zina, unless it's done under extremely limited scope, meaning through the realm of advice, counseling, seeking guidance on how to handle this Islamically. You cannot expose yourself having committed this sin. But now, someone might say, well, if they do that, then they're being unfair to the other side. Because the other side maybe it protected themselves their whole life, and now you're denying them of something that they expect and deserve. This is the logic that people have on this type of issue. How do you manage this type of reality? You're going to find different personalities in you seeking marriage. You're going to find the personality that's extremely interested in learning about your past, asking those types of questions. If you have a sketchy past, and you might find another type of person who doesn't really care. You know what? We've all done things in our past. I want to start on a new page with somebody, and I'm good. That's the end of it. I'm not going to ask anything beyond that. For someone who has a sketchy past and has done things they regret, this second type of person would be optimal for them to start their marriage life with. Now, what do I do if I am in the situation, a marriage proposal, and I'm asked this type of very intrusive question? Have you ever been in a haram relationship before? What do you say in that type of situation if you've been in a haram relationship? What you should do, if you're not going to disgrace yourself with having done haram, say no to the question immediately. And then at the end of the conversation, when the other side asks, can we proceed? You could keep it very general and generic. I don't think that this situation is going to work out for me. That way I do the best of both. I protect this person's interests because they're obviously very concerned about the past of whoever they're going to consider for marriage. And you know what? Everyone has their right in who they want to get married to. So I'm going to protect their interest, and at the same time, I'm going to protect my honor and my dignity. I'm not going to disgrace myself and expose myself. Brothers and sisters, the worst thing you could do is go and try to share those illicit sins of the past with someone you're considering for marriage, or with someone who you actually started the marriage process with, hoping that they'll be understanding. Because I've seen this situation play out many times, and you know what? It's not really easy to digest this, to get past it. It creates a big sense of mistrust, and it takes a toll on the relationship, and it usually doesn't end up working out after that. Be very clear from the beginning. I am someone who's not interested in finding out my other's past, and I'm looking to start a new page. That's the case. Let's continue on. Ala barakatillah. That's what I would say for this. It's a balancing act between these two. That's what I would say to that. Wallahu alam.
And the follow-up question is it permissible to ask about a person's past in the process?
Is it permissible to ask? You know, look, you can't really, this is going to go back to personalities. Some people are very laid back and respectable of people's boundaries. And other people are going to be very intrusive, very head-on in their questioning. And these are personality differences between people. No matter what I say or what I do, we're not going to be able to change that dynamic in reality. I could say, hey, you should not ask those types of questions head-on because you're actually cornering someone very directly. You could be very generic in presenting that, by saying, for example, I'm someone who, alhamdulillah, has been able to avoid, being in illicit relationships myself, and anyone I would consider for marriage, I would hope would be the same, and just leave it at that and move on. But to say to someone, have you ever been in a haram relationship before, is a very inappropriate question. Yeah. I don't know if you have something to add to that.
Barakallah feekum. Is there a dua we can make to meet our nasib sooner?
Just ask Allah to expedite it, and then you have to just rely on the qadr of Allah. Like we said yesterday, dua can change qadr, but only Allah knows. There's no specific dua. If you do this dua, you're going to get married faster. There's nothing like that. But ask if you're really eager, I really need to get married, Ya Allah. Again, pour your heart out to Allah. Why do you really need to get married? And ask Him, and inshallah He'll bring you your spouse when it's the best time for you. The sister had a follow-up question to that? Can we turn off the fans? How many people want to turn off the fans? It's not enough. It's not enough. I'm sorry. It's just put on something else. Another sister, have mercy on her, please, and give her another jacket she can put on to keep warm, inshallah.
You could ask a righteous person to make dua for you. If you know someone righteous, ask them to make dua for you to get married. We have up here also by the sisters.
This is really going to come back to you again, Shaykhi.
Okay.
The question is, there are...
Hey guys, can we all stay together? One conversation.
The question is that there are people within our community who might have mental health diseases that are not obvious on the surface. Is it obligatory that in the marriage process that the families reveal to one another these things?
If the person themselves who's seeking marriage has a mental health issue that might hinder the marriage in any way, this is definitely something that you need to expose. Like if someone has a serious mental health issue, like if they're bipolar, or if they have schizophrenia, or if they're manic depression or something like that. So these types of things are really going to affect the marriage life. So to keep this type of thing is going to cause a massive strain on the relationship when they find out about it later on. Because that's not something that's going to stay hidden. So you should be very forthcoming with that type of thing, of course.
Go ahead.
There was...
Yeah.
What about if there's fertility issues? Is it required to disclose that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If there's fertility issues, like if the person's unable to have children, they have to expose this type of thing because, again, it's one of the rights in marriage. So to keep that would be a form of deception. It's not fair. Now, there's a difference, though. If the person has fertility issues and the person's unable to have a child, right? And there's a lot of detail with that. So you just, if the person's clear on this issue, because many people might have, based on certain lab tests they might have difficulty having children, but they could technically have children. But some people from the get-go, they cannot have children. They just can't. But regardless, if a person knows this about themselves, it's a conversation they should have. Yeah.
Yeah, you might also just want to be very wise and particular about how and when, right? So there are some
Yes.
things that you can wait maybe 1 or 2 sittings before you share, but that also comes back to desire. So there are some people who, you know what, I have this issue, I'd rather not invest any time with a person until they know about this issue and they're okay going past it. And other people may feel like, I at least want to know that this has some traction, because I don't need everyone knowing my business. So if I might sit once or twice, if I find that this has a little bit of traction, we're going to get to know each other a little bit better, then I'll open up. It doesn't have to be the very first thing all the time. So you can apply some wisdom about when, but you definitely, I wouldn't wait until like the very end, like now we're ready to go, he's about to ask, then I'll tell him. That's probably not right, or vice versa. But you also don't have to make it the first thing you say if that's not the wisest thing. Who was the sister here? Who was up first? The sister in the front
Oh, a
row?
lot of people looks like it. يعني why not? If you guys didn't hear what she said the dua of Musa alayhi salam that he said when he retreated to the tree, after helping those 2 women who were trying to get their livestock, fed water. So he retreated and he said, "Rabbi inni lima anzalta ilayya min khairin faqir." Oh Allah, I am for what you have sent down to me or given me in dire need. And so Allah blessed him with the circumstances that end up leading up to marriage. Is this a dua for marriage? Technically not. Is it a beautiful thing to say with that intention? Very much, and perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will answer you if you say this type of dua with intentionality and sincerity. Why not?
What is the sunnah on Mahar? And there's other questions about it being, marriage becoming very expensive and inflation and all that. Is inflation transitory?
Seems like a lot of hands are up too on both sides. You said, what's the sunnah on Mahar? Go ahead, Saz. Lower?
Bismillah. Wallah, I mean, look, the general sunnah in general is that the community facilitate marriage. All right, that is the sunnah, is that you try to facilitate marriage, because the harder we as a community make it for us to get married, the more likely people fall into sin, and the less likely that we can build righteous homes. That doesn't mean that a person shouldn't put a mahar at all. There is obviously a sunnah of there being a mahar. Like the Prophet ﷺ established a sunnah, that there should be a mahar given. But we should do our best to make it as easy on each other as possible. And so there's no specific amount, as far as I know, and the Shaykh can correct me. There's no specific amount, but those are the 2 general principles that I know of. Make it easy on each other as much as possible, but you have no right as a guy to get angry if they placed a mahar, right? A mahar is sunnah. You should have a mahar. The Prophet ﷺ made it one of the conditions of a marriage is that there is a mahar. But as much as you can, as the father of a bride, make it as easy as possible for the sons of this community to get married, inshallah, so that goodness can spread. Khair will come from facilitating marriage, and shar will come from making it hard. So do your best to make it easy as possible.
I would add a few things. So look, the mahar is an important sunnah, and many people misunderstand what mahar is. It's not the guy buying the girl. There's no like transaction or purchase. There's like this absolutely toxic cultural understanding that if you get the shabka and you get some golden jewelry and you give mahar, you've bought the woman and now she's part of your family. And there's nothing further from the truth, right? Or there's hardly anything further from the truth. It's absolutely false and toxic cultural baggage that's brought into marriages that is absolutely baseless and needs to be ridden of. I'm serious about this, brothers and sisters. A lot of people have this understanding that mahar is a way that the guy purchases the girl. And it ends up becoming this contentious issue in their marriage. I bought you. I spent so much money. And that's part of why having less mahar is actually more blessed for the marriage. The Prophet ﷺ set this standard by saying this, because it's not meant to be a transactional thing. I need to be able to get this and have a wedding like that and do this in order for me. It's not meant to be transactional in that sense. Even though there is an agreement and the wedding gift is something that even our Prophet ﷺ did. Believe it or not, did the Prophet ﷺ give his wives Mahar? He did. He did. He didn't say, I'm the Prophet, so I don't need to. He didn't say, I guess the nice thing that people like to do if they just want to avoid the whole money thing is, I'm gonna, make the marriage on the account of him memorizing Surah Al-Baqarah or teaching her Surah Al-Baqarah or whatever it is. Did the Prophet ﷺ actually give money in his mahar? The answer is yes. How much? 12 uqiyas. That's what they go. Uqiyya is a pre-modern form of measurement. How much does it amount to? It amounts to around 1,500 grams of silver. But mind you, 1,500 grams of silver bought a whole lot of things during their times. In their times, they could buy a sheep for 1 dirham or 2 dirhams. A dirham is a silver coin, right? A dinar is a gold coin. So, imagine that. If you were to calculate that with inflation, that would be a substantial amount of money in the Prophet's time. If you were to calculate the inflation in that to what it would amount to, it would be something sizable for a woman to have. And that's not something wrong for someone to have an expectation of mahar. But just be reasonable, be merciful, realize that having a financial strain in the beginning of marriage could cause a lot of marital problems. Wallahu alam. That's what I would say about that.
Really quickly, we have a Jeep that's car alarm has been going off. Black Jeep C22 MTM. I think your car alarm is going off. If you could turn that off, it's disturbing the neighbors.
Oh man.
But I think
The
there's...
alarm's going off.
Yeah. Are you good for another half hour since we started?
Huh?
Are you good for another half hour since we started a little late? People still sleeping?
I'm fine. Whatever you want.
All right. There were some questions from the sisters.
Hey guys, we can't hear the questions.
I need everyone to lower their voices so we can hear
I can't hear the question good.
First, did you hear him?
The first question was about testing for like STDs and other things. And the second question was, are you allowed to discuss sexual expectations before marriage?
What does that mean?
Like compatibility and...
What is it?
So I'll leave the STD question. The testing is like a permissibility thing. I'll leave it to the sheikh, whether it's permissible or not. About the second one, I actually would echo the sheikh's question. I've gotten this question before and it's always kind of surprised me because I'm not sure, I'm really not sure what role that plays in this whole process, right? Like, sexual health is an important thing in a marriage. It's a very important thing in a marriage, and Islam is a religious tradition that celebrates that part of our life. It does not see it as a negative thing. The Prophet ﷺ called it a sadaqah. He called it a form of ibadah. He called it a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's a very beautiful thing. But I don't know, it confuses me that it would play such a big role in the get to know you process that you would have like elaborate conversations about what the expectations are, right? But she wants to, yeah. Go for it. What I'd actually suggest is text in your question anonymously, all right? Or whoever has more specificity around what she's asking, text it in anonymously. I can understand it may not be comfortable to speak this out loud. So that might be a question that you get a little bit more specific about in text so that we know what you're talking about, because I really can't imagine why you would have like more deep, what? She did, so it's there, so try to find it. Yeah, go ahead.
Like what? Like what do
They're
you...
not, yeah, I don't know if they're going to like, I think, I'm a little worried about where this is going. I'm going to give an answer, but hopefully Ibrahim can find the question that was texted in with a little bit more specificity. But if the problem is that some brothers are coming to the marriage conversation with like very specific, like, hey, I want to do X, Y, Z in the bedroom, are you going to be able to do that? My suggestion to the brothers is, whatever you're exposing yourself to, stop exposing yourself to that stuff. It's never positive. It's only going to be negative for your relationship. It's unrealistic. Just get to know your wife. Enjoy your time with her. Let it be an organic thing. It'll be far more enjoyable. If you're exposing yourself to ideas from the outside about what you should look like in the bedroom, you're never going to be satisfied, ever. Let that be something between you and your wife that stays between you and your wife. So long as there are no problems, so we have already discussed that. If there are problems that are going to prevent you from being able to perform in that part of your life, that is something that needs to be shared. But beyond that, I can't imagine you having such a serious, like heavy expectation that I'm not going to marry a woman until she can do X, Y, or Z. You're very misguided. At the very least, I can say you're very, very misguided in what you're looking for. Wallahu ta'ala alam.
I would add a few things. So first off, about the STD part of it, having that type of testing before marriage is definitely something allowable. If someone has an STD, this is one of the really, really unfortunate things that sometimes people find themselves in because of regretful decisions. I can't imagine the difficulty that a person would have in articulating this type of thing as they're pursuing marriage. But this is from the rights of the other party when you're pursuing marriage. So if you have an STD that would be transferred to your spouse if they get married to you, this is definitely something that you need to make them aware of, or else you'd be doing a form of oppression to them. How you make that, I would advise, before you share that type of information, sit down with somebody and get advice on how to share such type of things. You need to have a conversation with an imam, a mentor, a guide, but that's not something you can keep hidden. Unfortunately, I know of situations where this happened, and it was absolutely devastating to the marriage after the guy transferred the STD to his wife, and she found out that he had been doing illicit things. And, those types of things cause a marriage to crumble. So, that type of thing is absolutely allowable. About the other side of the question, I cannot imagine how a conversation in an engagement process would lead down the road to having a question on sexual expectations. It shows that that both sides are having way too detailed conversations way too soon. These are types of things that husband and wife should, learn or go off of each other's cues after marriage. It's not, you don't go, it's not a transactional thing. By the way, the Prophet ﷺ sets this standard for us. Just because you get married doesn't mean that your spouse, say if you're the guy, that your wife is at your mercy when it comes to sexual expectations. I should be able to do what I want, how I want it, when I want, and that's the end of the story. No, 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 that's not the case at all. These types of things are done, with a great deal of sensitivity, a great deal of responsibility. And I'll just say flat out, if you are in the process of considering somebody and these types of conversations open up, it should be a glaring red sign. What on earth am I getting myself into? If you're the guy or you're the girl, please, if you want to take someone's advice, if this is how your conversation is looking like and you're not even in ketb kitab, then I would absolutely walk away from that type of marriage proposal. If you're in the ketb kitab and you want to have those types of conversations, you're really getting ahead of yourself way too soon. When you get, it shows a sign of immaturity, to be honest with you. Someone who makes that on the top of the list of priorities does not know what the foundations of a successful marriage is about. It is not on expectations, it's more about building a bond and building a life with another human being. Now, of course, don't get me wrong, it's a very important component in the marriage relationship, but again, that comes second to actually winning over the heart of a person you're going to build your life with. Wallahu alam. So to me, it's a sign of immaturity, to be honest with you.
Yes, I agree, and I will. I mean, Ibrahim found other parts of the question, perhaps. So I will say this again. So look, what it seems to be a question from the sisters about the brothers. So I'm addressing the brothers. If the reverse is true, maybe the question can come up the other way, and I'll address that. So no one thinks I'm just simping here, right? I'm not simping. I'm trying to address the question as honestly as possible. All right. Bismillah. So to the young brothers, right? I understand when you're young, especially if you have adhered to the Sharia of our beloved Deen, your hormones are raging, and you think the way you feel right now is the way you're going to feel all the time, every time, all year, every year, until I'm 50. That's not the case. All right. Once real life starts to hit you, right, there are ups and downs even for that. How much you want to engage in it, how often you're going to desire it, it all changes. Once you actually have responsibilities in life and you're starting to get out of your own head because you have to worry about taking care of a household, bringing money into a household, leading a household, making sure that their deen is sound, making sure that their iman is sound, that concern becomes something far in the distance, right? It's not like a concern of yours anymore. It's a part of what you need, it's part of what she's going to need. It's a very, very different reality at that point. So if what's happening here is that brothers, because they're so sort of worked up, they need to know like, hey, I'm going to want this all the time and you need to be ready to give it to me all the time. You don't know yourself yet, which goes back to what I was saying. You're actually not ready yet because you're still focused on all the wrong things. That's not going to be that way forever. It's not even going to be like that in a year from now, right? Marriage does a lot of things to a man. A lot of positive things. I don't want anyone to misunderstand me. Marriage helps you grow up, right? It helps you grow up. Because once a man is not really a man, and I'm not saying this to put you down, I'm being real. Men don't become men until they're responsible for things. And one of the reasons why we have a manhood crisis in the world, and we have a manhood crisis in our communities, is that men are no longer responsible over things, right? It used to be that men would take on responsibility at a much younger age. This is why you had people at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, 11, 12, 13 years old, dying to be in the army of the Rasul ﷺ. And in some cases, in their early teens, leading armies, because they were raised to be men much sooner, because they took on responsibility much sooner. Once you have responsibility, the fullness of your manhood comes to be. So it's something very positive that happens to men, but don't assume that the way you feel right now about your sexuality is going to be exactly the way you are once you have real responsibilities and you become the fullness of who you really are. So don't make this a big thing. It's going to be something that's very beautiful in your marriage. It's going to be something, inshallah, you enjoy in your marriage. If you approach it the right way, you'll have a lot of fun with it. You will enjoy it. The Prophet ﷺ has a lot of beautiful advice around how to enjoy it. One day we'll talk about them at length, like the hadith of Jabir, which is one of the most beautiful ahadith in our tradition, where he talks about foreplay at length. The Prophet ﷺ talks about foreplay at length. This is a very beautiful thing, but it comes when you're really being the fullness of who you are. Don't assume what you want right now is the right way to go about it. Wallahu a'lam.
I don't think we need to add any more, but ask them because I don't like dismiss the question.
Okay, we'll address one more point that came back about like the specificity. It's possible that the issue is that people are pressuring one another to be intimate on the first night. Is it okay to not be intimate on the first night? Of course it's okay to not be intimate on the first night. I don't know if other people are going to say this. The funny thing is that quite often if you speak to married people, you'll find a lot of married people will tell you that, especially if they had a really fun wedding, it's not always very conducive to being intimate on the first night. All right, so it's not that uncommon that the first night you're getting back late, maybe people are tired, it doesn't happen until the next night or whatever have you, it's perfectly fine, it's not a negative sign about your marriage, it doesn't mean that you're never going to be able to do it doesn't mean that they're not excited. This is a very common issue that comes up. And don't make it a demand. It doesn't have to be something that's discussed ahead of time. I actually find it to be very foolish to discuss that ahead of time. Let it happen naturally if it's there. If you're not letting it happen naturally, you're not good at it. I mean, that's a good way to put it. You're not good at that part of life if you don't know how to let it happen naturally. Wallahu a'lam.
Look, I just will say one thing. Look, when it comes to this subject, I just want to reiterate, it needs to be done with a lot of sensitivity and a lot of mercy. And this actually goes both ways, by the way. For guys and for girls, brothers and sisters, be very careful not to emotionally wound the other side in this regard. Because emotional wounds, when it comes to matters of sexuality, could actually cause a deep strain on a marriage. Now, and again, like I said, this could be a wife emotionally wounding her husband by rebuffing him in a hurtful way, or the guy hurting his wife by being too aggressive and not being merciful enough to allow it play out naturally, as Ustad Zaid was saying. There needs to be a lot of responsibility in this regard. Be very sensitive to your spouse's emotion and allow these things to play out with a great deal of rahmah. And that's what we learned from the Prophet ﷺ in his relationship with those in his home. And I hope that could be taken to heart. Don't make it something materialistic, maddi, transactional. No, let it be done very, very thoughtfully. Wallahu alam.
Barakallah feek, Shaykhna and Ustad Zaid. That concludes that section.
Alhamdulillah.
So there were a few questions about khushu' and salah.
What a good transition, man.
If there isn't a shaitan in Ramadan, why do I still feel distracted in salah? How do I maintain khushu' in salah? I can't focus in tarawih. Things of that nature. Are there general advices, if we can keep them under 5 minutes or so, and then get into some other questions?
Who said there isn't shaitan in Ramadan? Who said there isn't shaitan in Ramadan? There is, in the Quran says there's shayateen al-jinn and shayateen al-ins. Shayateen al-jinn, there's human beings who are devils as well, right? You think they're shackled up in Ramadan? They're not, No one's going to shackle them up, right? And I'm just joking with you guys. But even with the shayateen al-jinn, are they all shackled in Ramadan? The answer to this is no. According to many scholars, they say maradat al-shayateen, the heads and the leads of the devils. But anyway, regardless with that, khushu' is, or lack of khushu' is not only coming from the shaitan or a satanic presence. Lack of khushu' has many contributing factors to it. Too many distractions in my mind, lack of effort, fatigue, exhaustion, even if you want to take something as basic as overeating, causing lack of khushu' in tarawih, very big thing. So there's so many contributing factors. It's not just coming from the shaitan.
Are Muslims the only ones who enter Jannah? Can a non-Muslim who has extreme faith in God enter the gates of heaven even if they're practicing the wrong religion?
Okay. So unequivocally, the only pathway to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala correctly in today's world is the pathway of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. There is no other pathway to worship Allah that is true and right. Yes, we worship the same God as our Jewish brethren. We worship the same God as our Christian brethren. But there are not three ways to worship Allah. There's only the way of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we believe firmly if Moses was alive today, he would follow the way of Muhammad. If Jesus was alive today, peace be upon him, he would follow the way of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, with that said, do the ulama leave a door open that there will be or can be people who are alive today who Allah may enter into heaven even though they're not Muslim? Yes, the ulama leave that door open. What is that door? It's possible, for example, that the circumstances Allah gave that person in life did not allow them to get to properly know or be properly introduced to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam or Muhammad's way. And so yes, those people, there is a door left open that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may let them into Jannah. We pass no judgment on individual people. That's not our job. We don't pass judgment on individuals, period. Muslim or non, we don't say this person is in heaven or that person is in hell, Muslim or non. Right? We leave that open. But as a general question, can a person who has heard about the message of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam reject the message of Muhammad or reject the way of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and say, as long as I just worship God in some ambiguous way or in some other way? No, that's not something that we openly call to. If you want to worship God the right way in today's world, the way is through the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that's through Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Yesterday you mentioned growing a spine as a man. So there's two parts or two different questions that kind of come together here. One person says, should I just make a dua, oh Allah, grow me a spine, make me a man, or how does it work? And then the bigger question here is, how do we define masculinity in an Islamic perspective?
That's not how you're going to grow a spine, by making dua. You need to do certain things. What are those things? You need to invest in becoming someone who's responsible, someone who is qa'im bi amrillah, someone who's aware of the boundaries of Allah, someone who is giving the huquq and the right. That's part of what manhood's about, giving the rights and responsibilities that are due towards others, whether those are emotional rights, financial rights, or otherwise. So that's what really makes a man. I need to invest in a certain lifestyle, that leads to those ends. Wallahu alam. How are we going to define masculinity? It's a big question. I don't know if you have something to add. Tfaddal.
So there is a lot of conversation that I think needs to be had about this. I don't know that at 2 a.m. or 2:20 a.m. after almost 2 hours we're going to be able to have that conversation in depth. But I will say, to keep it simple, right? I'll give you a very simple definition. If you want to grow a spine as a man, know what your moral code is, and then stick to it no matter how difficult that is. Right? So know what your moral code is, know what Islam says about things, know what the Prophet ﷺ says your character should be like, and then stick to that no matter how difficult it is. That's what it means to be a man, period. That is also what it means to be a woman. They just manifest themselves in different ways. No mature person is mature unless they know what their values are and are able to stick to them even when it's difficult, and especially when it's difficult. All right, so know what the Prophet expects from you as a man, what God expects from you as a man, and then commit to that no matter how hard it is. All right, so and then most of it, like some of you in the crowd may already know what I'm talking about. Yeah, I know Allah wants me to get up and pray, but for example, I'm too tired. It's too difficult to wake up at Fajr. I know that the Prophet ﷺ told me that praying in the masjid is significantly more rewarded than praying at home. I know I can make it to the masjid. There's nothing really stopping me, but you know what? I just don't feel like doing it. Right? No, if you're a man and you know that's your moral code, force yourself out of bed in the morning early, get yourself ready, come to the masjid and pray. The more you do those hard things, the more manly you're going to be. Being a man is summed up into those two things. Know what the right thing is and do it no matter how hard it is. Wallahu a'lam. Unless there's some really pressing question,
I think we should end. Yeah? Tfaddal. End it.
Barakallahu feekum for joining us. Inshallah, we'll be coming again Friday, Saturday. Saturday we'll have the community iftar here, inshallah.
Yes.
And we have a full i'tikaf program. Suhoor is at 4:15.
We have Sheikh Yasser with us next Saturday.
We have Sheikh Yasser with us next Saturday, inshallah.
إن شاء الله. جزاكم الله خير. السلام عليكم guys.